and welcome to another fun-filled, exciting, expeditious episode of Radiorama, where I show you, as always, to work on things like radios, televisions, stereo systems, record players, anything that tends to run on glowing vacuum tubes from about the 1920s to about the 1960s. And today we have a Zenith, affectionately known as the RaceTrack, because you can see here we have this RaceTrack type shape in the front. The model itself is model H511Y. It is a typical 5-tube All-American 5 set, as we call them, AA5s. When I first got it, it was actually in pieces. The chassis was coming out. I've already removed the speaker. The back was coming off. The pilot light was loose, and I thought to myself, maybe there's something catastrophically wrong with this. So maybe I should test fire it before I get started. The first thing I noticed is that it has this 1960s or 70s era spray replacement electrolytic, which means it's been worked on before. I brought it up slowly. It actually does work, so who knows why it got taken apart and not put back together again. Mystery to be unknown. Now, it's already loose, and because it's kind of a nice, pleasant day today, I'm going to do the cosmetics first, which is going to involve waxing the case. But before we do that, gently pull off the knobs. Put them somewhere to safekeeping, like on my lap, so they'll fall on the ground. And with this model, it's kind of key. If you try to jerk this chassis out, you'll bend the tuning dial. So what you do is you line it up with this little notch here. You press, and you should be able to pull the entire chassis out in one piece. And we're just going to set the chassis and the knobs down here. And what I'm going to use is a product. It's real important when you clean Bakelite, do not take it over to the sink and scrub it with soap and water. You'll ruin the finish. It's a very delicate finish. My neighbor is over there drilling away. Anyway, I use natural Arduva paste wax. I prefer the natural stuff, not the synthetic. And we're just going to use a circular motion using some old rags. Luckily, my wife's cleaned out the sock drawer, and so I have plenty of fresh rags to use to get that surface. So take your time. It takes maybe about 2 or 3 applications, and we'll take a look when it's done. Okay, so I'm partially done with the cleaning process. This is the case with just 1 application of wax. And what I've also decided to do, because the details are important, is if you take a look in the back of the cabinet, you'll see these little twisted metal flaps, and they're twisted to hold them in place. And what you do is get a pair of needle nose pliers, straighten them up. Both that and the badge will come out, and that way you can individually polish those, and also do things like get all the little areas that went under the badge and behind the RaceTrack shape. And so we'll be able to do a more detailed polish on the metal as well as the Bakelite. Alright, so this is after about an hour or so of polishing, and you can see what a difference it makes just doing small details like taking the trim off, especially this little badge. Initially it was kind of grubby looking with all the grub and disgusting looking stuff behind it because I couldn't get at it, but now that I can, you can see that makes all the difference. Pretty fancy schmancy in my opinion. Anyway, so that's all I'm going to do on the set today. Tomorrow we will begin on the electronics. Alright, welcome to day 2 of working on the Zenith RaceTrack. I'm going to start recapping the chassis. And before I do anything, I'm going to take it outside, clean up the dust a little bit on this thing. Just take it outside where the wind is blowing a little bit, and just get the loose stuff off. It's a stamped aluminum chassis, it appears, so I'm not too worried about any cadmium, even though I don't see any corrosion on this at all. This has been kept in a real dry place. Out here in California, we barely have any humidity. It tends to preserve things pretty well, including cars, which is why my car here has no rust on it, even though it spent its first 50 years outside. Alright, so what I'm going to do is start off by replacing the 2 electrolytics that are inside of this aluminum can here. A 50 and a 30 microfarad. We're just going to replace that with 2 individual electrolytics. Alright, so let's get started. First of all, I did clean up the chassis. No corrosion at all. First thing I noticed is kind of like someone decided to jerry rig on a new cord. And what they did is they just attached it to the old rotten cord, and you can see here where it's like crumbling off the insulation. If I just touch it, that's wrapping around all the way to where B plus attaches right here. That is a fire hazard waiting to happen. So obviously I need to push this new cord all the way in and attach it the right way, which is here and there. So what we're going to do now is replace the two electrolytic capacitors, and they are located here and here. There's your two lugs there. The first thing I do, since I know this is a replacement, it could be that whoever soldered the new one in maybe didn't wrap them up very much. Maybe they'll be easy to pluck out of here. All right. Well, hats off to the last repairman. They definitely stuck this together quite well. Just sort of annoying. Arg. All right. Pull the lead for this resistor here. It just does not want to come. All right, we got those two, and then we got... Damn it. I touched that cord with the iron, and now it stinks. All right. Let's get... Yuck. Let me wipe my wand off here. All right. Get this last resistor. Come on now. Pull out of there. Yeah, see, if it'd been me, I just would have put them on there real generically. Anyway, so that's the first lug. I'll go ahead and rip old lug from the old cap off of there and make us more room for the new electrolytics. Come on. That is one tough capacitor. So now we get our positives out of the way here. And we'll take the negative. I'll just replace them with electrolytic. I usually trim them down just a little bit. And what we want to do is try to attach it as snugly as possible to this negative lug. See, this is a floating chassis, and that phenolic spacer that this capacitor is sitting on, that is obviously not touching ground. The ground is going through this capacitor. This is the grounding cap where the other side of the AC line goes in. So we'll need to replace that as well, because that's the wrong type of cap and it's the wrong value. Come on, put me in a pain. All right, so that one is securely fastened, and so we'll get first this big fat resistor guy here, and then these two guys can wrap around just like so. Then we'll solder it in place. There's quite a bit of solder still on there from when it was attached to the old one. And then we'll just snip that off. So that's the first one. The other one has, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 leads. How much fun is that? I'm going to go ahead and clip this because I think I don't want to burn that rubber shit again. That's pretty gross smelling. Let's see. It's going to be difficult without getting my hand in the way of the camera. But we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to loosen all the goodies that are attached. This one's also really stuck very well together. All right, there's one. I swear, if any of you people out there watching this or watching it with your significant other, they're probably rolling their eyes and wondering, what in the hell are you watching? Some guy like unsolder shit? But here you are. All right. So we got all those leads removed. Unfortunately, I broke one of them, but that's no problem. I can strip that one down to size. And again, I'm going to trim that lug down, and then we've got this. Let me get this guy out of the way. This is one of the positive leads. Do the same thing. We're going to trim a little bottom here, and we're going to very neatly put it in this little corner here. We'll solder it to that negative lug. Where's my solder? There it is. I lost my solder for a second. And we come in here and make sure that we really secure it. That should be good. Kind of lift it off a little bit. Well, this is when you need sometimes to get a tool. That's what I want right there. Again, you want them down snug as close as possible to their negative point, so the cap's not going to move around at all. A lot of people like to use terminal strips. I find it's just as easy to do what I'm doing there. The idea is, the operative word is to keep the capacitor from wiggling around. So now we can attach all this stuff. That was my hand is covering part of this, sorry. And then we'll get this guy. This is close. And then we have, there's a weird wire thing. There it is. And lastly, we have this thing. Didn't like how close it was to that resistor, so move the resistor up a little bit. And let's solder it all together. And it looks like that's doing the same thing. There's a big glob of solder left over from when it was positioned on the old cap. And we'll let that dry. Cool, rather. And I'm about neaten that up a little bit. It looks fine to me, but let me just touch that up a scotch. There we go. That makes me feel better. You always want to make sure your solder joints look real solid. Just make sure everything is kosher here. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Nothing's touching. We've got lots of contact. The electrolytics are attached real firmly to the chassis. So the next thing we're going to do is replace that cap with this. This is an X2Y2 across the line cap. But first, I'm going to replace this rotten cord. So after I do that, those two things, we'll give it a test fire. All right, so I have replaced the electrolytics as well as the safety cap and clean up the mess with the cord. So now I've got everything kind of jumpered together. Got the antenna, the speaker, all that jazz. So we're going to plug it into my isolation transformer and fire it up. Boy, that switch is very gummy. You know, I think before I do that, I'm going to clean contacts on that switch. I'll have to do it eventually anyway. Yes, I'm soaking it with WD-40. A lot of people have made comments to the effect that they're horrified that I use WD-40 on volume pots, but it seems to work really well with me. I've never had a problem with it. It's mostly just kerosene. Pretty harmless. That said, I don't recommend you spray it on your computer or any like modern electronics. See, now it's making a much more snappy noise. The switch was kind of gummed up, so let's go ahead and plug it in with the isolation transformer. And it looks like we're off to the races. Pilot light came on, of course, and our tube filaments are lighting up. And sometimes when you replace... Whoa, what is going on? Something is really horrifically wrong with that tube. That's the rectifier, and that guy just... It just blew up, and it also blew up the pilot light. Great! So I needed to get another 35W4 tube and put it in there. Okay, so I replaced the rectifier with a known, good, tested, good one. I'm gonna do pilot light here. Let's try it again. Well, that pilot light's obviously no good. I must have put a bad one in it. Let me turn that off. That's aggravating. Is that a 47? I think I have this bad habit of putting bad light bulbs back in the sockets for some stupid ass reason. Alright. Now let's try it. That's not the right bulb, but whatever. Let's see if it blows up again.
Granted a request to look at records involving Rodney.
Cycle battery
Consumers can
points. The appeal of this was more than he could stand.
One life at a time.
Alright, we're in pretty good shape. I'm going to do what I should do all the time, which is throw tubes away that are bad. Sometimes what happens is that I'll forget about them being bad and I'll leave them on my counter. And they're bad and I put them back in the tube box and then I test it again and they blow up. So, word to the wise. Alright, welcome back to day 2 of working on the Zenith. And I'm just about done here. I have one more capacitor to replace. This guy kind of like snaked under all those components. And then it's going to be time to do the thing that I always do with these radios, which is add an audio input feature. And you know what I need to do? I remember I had some person say, can you draw a schematic so I can see how this works? So let me put this down. I'm going to go get a piece of paper and draw this out. And hopefully it'll make it easier for some of you guys who've, watched my video and it's not super clear, which I get it. It's kind of hard to show something in 3 dimensions. So let me make that and I'll be back in just a minute. Okay, well, I'm kind of glad I drew this out because I've done this so much that it's just automatic. And so when I drew this out, I was like, yeah, I can see why people might be a little confused. There's quite a few steps that you need to take. And it seems like the older I get, the worse I draw. I used to actually do illustration, but I haven't done it in decades, so now I use a computer. So I can barely even read my own hand scratch. But anyway, so here's how it works. So we have an audio cable, and that looks like, for example, that. That cable has a right and left channel. And then there is a grounding side. It's usually the black wire. Sometimes it'll be a bare wire, like a stranded bare wire. And we want to run both the right and the left channels of that audio input to the secondary side of this isolation transformer. Now, something I forgot to mention is it's just a transformer, and what I'm using here is 120 AC in and 12 AC out. And so the primary is the 120 volt in. The secondary is the 12 volts out. We want to run, I know it seems backwards, but we want to run the audio through the secondary of the secondary of the isolation transformer. And what we do is we tie the right and left channels together, and that way we can get all that true mono. The other side is the ground, and then the primary side of the isolation transformer, that's going to go to the volume pot, which is this thingy. And it has 3 legs. There's a top and a center and a bottom. You don't need to worry about the center. and the top is where the radio signal is coming in. And so you want to tack on to the same lead that the the incoming audio signal is. It should be obvious because when you look in these things, you'll eventually determine which one is the grounded side of the pot. And I can deduce by looking at it, and also the fact that this bottom cable goes to this IF transformer. It's most likely this is most certainly ground. Well, I'll double check, but I think that's definitely the case. Anyway, so your audio signal from the primary, the isolation transformer goes to the top of the pot, and we need to make sure that we add a little switch that's in between the radio signal and the volume pot. Make sense? So we want to have the ability to switch the radio signal on and off from it getting to the lead, the top of the volume control. So we're going to run a little switch wire. Doesn't have to be much of anything special. Let's see, what did I do with it? Like this stuff, that works. And lastly, what I forgot to mention, and this is why I kept on drawing it and making it bigger, on the primary side of the isolation transformer, you need to add a few more things, because we found that over time the isolation transformer was kind of messing up the set's automatic gain control, which most of these 5-tube American sets have, especially by this time period. And so to kind of basically remove that impact, we're going to put a resistor at 270K in series with a 0.02 rated cap. Voltage is pretty insignificant. You can get away with 50 volts. And so that's between, again, the incoming primary to the top of the volume pot. And so you need those two between those 2 points right here where it says prime. Anyway, I've tried to explain this in layman's terms the best I can, and I hope that this makes sense. Maybe it'll make more sense when I install it and you can kind of see it a little more up close and personal. Okay, this is going to be the last shot for the evening. I had a lot of unexpected bugs I ran into with this thing. Usually it's pretty easy for me to discover which one of the leads is the radio signal lead. And I don't know, it was in a weird place this time. I'm running the wire basically between those two right there. I think it's a 12BE6 and the stage coming off of one of the IF or RF transformers. And we see here's our setup. We have the two resistors that tie the two sides to mono. They're going in through the secondary. The primary then goes to either end of the pot. We have our resistor and cap. The only thing I'm not pleased about, and maybe I'm just being overly sensitive, I think there's something wrong with the speaker.
So long sailing, bye-bye sailing.
Like, it's on the edge. As in, like, it feels like it's got a little bit of a rubbing voice coil, but oftentimes when you put them back in the cabinet, they'll kind of realign themselves, and it sounds like that could be the case with this one. Regardless, I might run over and get a replacement anyway, because we have scads of them. But that's all I'm going to do for the night. I think tomorrow is going to be about doing final testing, securing a better speaker, and putting it back together again. Alright, it's final assembly time, and I did go over to the museum. I have a new old stock 4-inch speaker, but I think the one that is in here is probably alright. I went ahead and installed it. Like I said, when you flatten them out, when you put them back in the case, it tends to stop any rattling. And there's going to be a little bit of a buffer from the cabinet that is in front of the speaker that has a tendency to quieten down noisy speakers as well. So we're going to shove it back in the cabinet, and we're going to run probably the switch through one of these existing holes, so I don't have to drill anything, and then we'll put the back on, give it a final test. Should be good to go. Alright, that speaker's hosed. This may not show up, but well, anyway, that's got to go. I'm going to put the replacement speaker in it. Oh well. Alright, it's now done. Back together again. My wife actually wants me to buy this. I'm torn. I have a lot of radios, and I know that we would do well with this at one of our shows. It was kind of a pain in the butt, but it's back in good shape now. That little light behind the Z is pretty cool. You know, I've got my audio running through it. Anyway, that speaker I put in there is actually not bad. It's a new old stock Utah, probably from the early 50s, which is the period correct speaker for this. You wouldn't put any, you know, woofers or anything like that. Even though I'm sure it could improve the sound quality, but this is more authentic. Anyway, this one's in the bag. I'll think about it. And otherwise, it's going to make someone in the future very happy. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, as always, you can leave them in the comment section below. And until the next time a radio, a TV, or a stereo, or anything else comes across my workbench, see you guys next time. Adios.